In the brutal winter of 1847, 17 young women arrived at the gates of St. Margaret's Convent, nestled deep in the frozen hills of western Pennsylvania. They came with one purpose: to devote their lives to God. They brought hope, faith, and innocence into a place that promised sanctuary. But by the time spring thawed the earth, 14 of them were dead, and the 3 who survived, they refused to utter a single word about what unfolded inside those stone walls. For over 100 years, the Catholic Church kept the records sealed, locked away in dusty archives where no one could find them. But now, after generations of silence, something has surfaced: a letter, handwritten, from the last surviving nun. And what it reveals isn't just chilling. It's an unholy nightmare that shakes the foundation of what we believe about religious devotion, about sanctity, and about the human soul itself. What could drive 14 women, devout, disciplined, and full of faith, to their deaths in a place built for prayer? What unseen terror crept through the halls of that convent? And why did the church bury this story so deep that not even seasoned investigators dare to bring it to light? Because the truth wasn't just tragic. It was something far worse. The testimony hidden in that letter was so horrifying, so dark, that even veteran clergy tasked with reviewing the case couldn't finish reading it. They closed the file, and they never spoke of it again. Tonight, for the first time, that silence is broken. Tonight, the hidden story of the nuns who never took their final vows is told. But before we step inside those haunted hills of Pennsylvania, a warning. This tale isn't for the faint of heart. These are stories the world tried to forget, stories buried in time and fear. If you're someone who seeks truth in the shadows, if you can handle the darkest corners of history, then stay with us. Because what's coming will test everything you think you know. Now imagine the world in 1847, a time when America was still trying to find its spiritual identity. The Catholic Church was desperate to establish itself in a land dominated by Protestant voices. That year was a breaking point. The Irish were fleeing famine, flooding into the country with broken bodies and starving souls. The church scrambled to offer shelter, hope, and purpose. Pennsylvania, founded on religious tolerance, seemed like fertile ground for faith to flourish. But not everyone welcomed the Catholic newcomers. In western Pennsylvania, tensions were thick. Convents, seen by Protestants as mysterious and foreign, became breeding grounds for rumors. They whispered about young girls being imprisoned, about rituals done in secret, about things that didn't belong in the light. And in the hills above them, hidden behind the stone walls of St. Margaret's, something began to stir, something that would take 14 lives and leave only silence behind. For generations, Protestant families had built their lives across the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, their churches, their communities, their traditions, all deeply rooted. But now, with Catholic immigrants pouring in, fear crept into their prayers. They didn't just see new faces. They saw a threat to everything they believed in. Newspapers fanned the flames, printing shocking stories about Catholic convents, stories of innocent girls locked away, hidden from the world, trapped inside stone walls, never allowed to speak or leave. One article even described the convents as prisons in disguise, and the people believed it. Fueling the fire was a powerful political movement known as the Nothing Party, a group hell-bent on purging Catholic influence from American soil. In towns across the region, they were gaining power fast. For Catholic institutions, the message was clear: you're not welcome here. And yet, rising defiantly in the misty hills of Westmoreland County, just 30 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, stood St. Margaret's Convent, a fortress of faith, a symbol of devotion, and, as some whispered, a place of secrets. The convent was no ordinary building. Constructed in 1832 by German stonemasons, it towered 3 stories high, carved from the bedrock beneath it. The stone was cold, gray, and unyielding. Gothic windows stared out like watchful eyes over the valley below, while the bell tower pierced the sky like a finger raised toward heaven, or a warning to anyone who dared approach. It was built to intimidate, and it did. The walls, thick limestone blocks, kept the inside frigid, even in summer. And in winter, the cold crept into the bones. The narrow windows let in so little sunlight, it was like the building lived in perpetual twilight, where footsteps vanished into silence and whispers never escaped. Inside lived the Sisters of Divine Mercy, an order unlike any other. They weren't teachers. They didn't run hospitals. Their only mission was the perfection of the soul through suffering. Pain wasn't just tolerated, it was welcomed. It was holy. They accepted only young women, ages 18 to 25, and not just anyone. These were girls of extraordinary faith and unbreakable resilience, both spiritual and physical, because in this place, faith wasn't a comfort. It was a test. At the head of it all was Mother Superior Agatha Rousseau, a woman wrapped in silk but ruled with steel. She was 53, tall, poised, and regal, like a queen in mourning. Her English was laced with thick French accent, turning even simple psalms into something otherworldly. Her pale blue eyes didn't just see, they pierced. The younger sisters swore she could read their sins just by looking at them. And behind her soft voice and graceful movements was a terrifying mystery. She had fled France during the violent political upheavals of the 1830s, carrying with her ancient manuscripts and religious relics she claimed were older than the church itself. She called America a spiritual wasteland. To her, the New World wasn't a land of freedom. It was a land that needed to be conquered with iron discipline and unyielding faith. Her past was clouded in fog. She spoke of convents across Europe, places she had served, secrets she had kept. But when Bishop Patrick O'Malley of Pittsburgh began asking questions about Mother Agatha's past, the answers he received were vague and unsettling. Letters came back from France with nothing concrete, only cryptic mentions of administrative changes and relocated personnel. No names, no confirmations, just smoke and silence. But one thing was beyond doubt. Mother Agatha knew more about Catholic doctrine than most bishops. Her memory was flawless. Her interpretations were razor-sharp. And her belief? That modern religious life had grown soft, too forgiving, too obsessed with comfort, too tolerant of human frailty. She wasn't here to comfort souls. She was here to forge them in fire. At St. Margaret's, life was not just strict. It was merciless by design. Each morning began at 4 a.m. sharp. The women rose in silence, their bare feet touching the ice-cold stone floors as they moved like shadows through candlelit halls toward the chapel. No greetings, no smiles, just a chilling sound of silence and flickering flame. Breakfast was no relief. Thin gruel, stale bread, eaten in total silence, and over it all, Mother Agatha's voice, reciting dense, ancient theological texts. Her words hung heavy in the cold air, foreign and powerful, as if pulled straight from the depths of some forgotten century. The rest of the day unfolded in absolute discipline, hours upon hours of silent prayer, back-breaking labor in the gardens and kitchens, long study sessions with manuscripts written in Latin and French. Every movement was purposeful, every breath measured. Talking was allowed only for essential tasks. Laughter, that was a sin of the flesh. Spiritual weakness, she called it, punished immediately with extended solitary prayer in freezing chambers. But the harshest conditions weren't for the sisters. They were for the novices, the young women preparing to take their final vows. Here, the test of faith became extreme. Meals shrank into long, painful fast. Soft beds became bare stone floors, where they were required to kneel through the night in prayer. Private reflections became public confessions, where even the smallest doubt or moment of impure thought had to be confessed aloud before the entire convent. To outsiders, it might have seemed cruel, but to Mother Agatha, it was necessary. She believed this process purified the soul, stripping away every worldly influence, every distraction, every trace of weakness, until only raw, unwavering devotion remained. And into this world of relentless discipline stepped a young woman named Catherine Murphy. She was barely 21 when she arrived in the fall of 1846. Bright-eyed, full of hope, the daughter of Irish immigrants who had clawed their way through the filth and fury of the Philadelphia slums. Her father, Thomas Murphy, had worked the docks until tuberculosis took him when Catherine was only 16. Her mother, a bridge between old Ireland and the harsh realities of America, taught Catherine both English and Gaelic. She raised her daughter with stories of saints, strength, and survival. And Catherine, unlike most, could read, write, and pray in two tongues, but her greatest gift was her faith. She had seen too much pain to believe in anything else. She had watched her neighbors die in alleyways. She had felt hunger chew at her belly. But still, she believed, because the Sisters of Charity, who ran a tiny clinic nearby, had shown her what faith in action could look like. Their kindness was a light in the darkest part of her life, and it lit a fire inside her. She didn't come to St. Margaret's to suffer. She came to serve. She wanted to help the poor, to spread God's love, to live a life of purpose. But what awaited her beyond those stone walls was not loved. It was trial and pain and something much, much darker. Catherine Murphy had come to St. Margaret's with dreams of a sacred life, a calling to heal, to serve, to love. But what she found beyond those convent walls was something colder than the stone floors beneath her bare feet. The warmth she'd known back in Philadelphia, the kindness of the Sisters of Charity, their gentle smiles, the spirit of mercy, it was gone, replaced by shadow, silence, and something she couldn't yet name. Decades later, long after the world had forgotten St. Margaret's, a trunk was discovered in the attic. Inside it, a bundle of Catherine's letters, brittle with age but burning with truth. Her words revealed not just a brilliant young woman full of compassion, but a soul beginning to unravel under the weight of secrets too dark to bear. The winter of 1847 was merciless. Snow fell in November and didn't stop. By March, the drifts reached the second-story windows. The convent was buried, physically, spiritually, completely. No visitors. No mail. No sound of the outside world, except for the rare visit of Father Heinrich Metz, an aging German priest who tried to reach them once a week. But even he began to vanish as the roads froze over. The forest paths turned white, and the snow swallowed the trails whole. By January, they were completely alone. Food supplies, already minimal by design, plummeted to dangerous levels. The gardens were buried beneath 6 feet of snow. The root cellar was almost empty. And yet, Mother Agatha didn't ease the suffering. She made it worse. Labor was increased. Fasting was extended. Tasks became more brutal. And all of it, she said, was for the soul. Pain is a path to purity. She promised this winter would be a sacred test, a purification, a way to separate the weak from the worthy. But the girls, they were wasting away. Skin pale. Eyes sunken. Faith turning into fear. And then came December 13th. That night, Catherine wasn't woken by the chapel bell. She was woken by sobbing, soft, desperate, and near. It was her roommate, Sister Mary Agnes O'Brien, a shy 19-year-old who had only been there for 2 months. Catherine whispered her name. But instead of words, Mary Agnes grabbed her arm with a strength that didn't match her starving frame. She pulled Catherine close. Her breath was hot. Her voice was shaking. "They're taking us to the chapel," she whispered, "one by one, in the middle of the night. And some of us don't come back the same." Her voice cracked. "Sister Elizabeth came back 3 nights ago, but it's not her anymore. She doesn't eat with us, doesn't talk. I saw her drink something red from a cup Mother Agatha gave her, and her eyes, Catherine, her eyes reflect light like an animal's." Catherine froze, because she'd seen it too. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but she had noticed a change in Elizabeth. The stillness. The emptiness. The way she stared too long at things no one else could see. And then there was the chapel. The chapel at St. Margaret's was unlike anything Catherine had ever seen. It wasn't above ground like in Philadelphia. It was beneath, carved directly from the limestone bedrock. A hollow, cold cavern that swallowed light and sound. The walls were slick with moisture. The air hung heavy with mold and mystery. And the candles flickered in ways that made shadows crawl. But it wasn't the darkness that terrified her. It was the symbols. Not crosses, not saints, but spirals, eyes, geometric forms that twisted the mind, images that seemed to breathe when you looked too long, that hurt to look at. Mother Agatha called them ancient Christian symbols, relics of the early martyrs from the Roman catacombs. But Catherine knew her history. She had been taught by scholars, real scholars, back in Philadelphia. And these symbols weren't from any version of Christianity she had ever known. They looked older, more primal, more dangerous. And then there was the altar. No stone slab, no holy table, just a shallow circular pit carved into floor, surrounded by grooves that slithered out into the dark. Mother Agatha said it was designed to collect and consecrate offerings, but she never said what kind. Whatever it was, it stained the stone dark, thick, and soaked deep into the rock, forming shapes that pulse like veins. Then the clock struck midnight, and everything changed. Mother Agatha appeared at the dormitory door, flanked by 2 senior sisters. But their faces were gone, completely shrouded in thick black veils that covered them entirely. Only 2 black holes or eyes remained, peering out like empty sockets from behind cloth. They carried candles. But these flames didn't glow with warm yellow light. They burned with something else. And what followed would mark the beginning of the end. They weren't ordinary candles. The flames burned cold, a sharp blue-white light that cast shadows where there shouldn't have been any. The walls twisted, the beds warped. Even the crucifix above the doorway looked alien, like it was made of bone instead of wood. Then came the voice, low, controlled, but it sliced through the silence like a knife. "Sister Mary Agnes," whispered Mother Agatha from the doorway. Her voice barely rose above the hum of silence, yet every syllable reached Catherine's ears like a personal curse. "It is time for your private examination of faith." She stepped forward, flanked by the 2 veiled sisters holding those strange flames. "You have been chosen for a special honor," she continued, "one that will test your dedication to our sacred mission. Come with us willingly, and you will be rewarded with understanding beyond your current comprehension." Catherine's blood ran cold. She could barely breathe as she watched her roommate rise. Mary Agnes, trembling just hours before, now moved like a sleepwalker. Her bare feet made no sound on the icy stone. As she passed, she turned her head slowly, her face pale, her mouth trembling. And then she mouthed 2 silent words. "Help me?" No scream, no protest, just a whisper without sound, like a prayer already lost to God. The door closed behind her with a deep, final thud that echoed down the hallway, like the lid of a coffin slamming shut. Catherine didn't move, didn't breathe. She just stood there, frozen in the dark. Then she ran to the door and pressed her ear against the heavy wood. Nothing. No whispers, no footsteps. The walls, like before, swallowed every sound. She rushed to the narrow dormitory window, trying to see into the chapel below. It was usually dimly lit at night, but now it was something else entirely. The chapel's windows had been completely covered with thick, black curtains, but behind them a soft, unnatural glow pulsed, not like candlelight, but like the stones themselves were glowing. The color wasn't white. It wasn't even blue. It was the color of something you only see once, right before you go blind. Hours passed. Catherine didn't sleep. Or rather, she tried, but every time she closed her eyes, she jolted awake, heart racing, hands trembling, as if something were watching her, waiting. Then, just before dawn, she heard it. Footsteps, but not the hurried steps of a frightened girl. These were slow, deliberate, measured, almost inhuman. The door creaked open, and standing there was Mary Agnes, but not the Mary Agnes Catherine knew. Her eyes were wide, blank, and somehow brighter than before, as if they caught the faintest light and reflected it with an unnatural gleam. Her walk had changed too. Gone was the nervous, jittery energy. In its place was a kind of silent grace, like a dancer gliding across glass. She turned to face Catherine, and for just a second, her eyes caught the light, and something inside them moved. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. Something writhed and twisted in her gaze, like smoke trapped behind glass, shifting and flickering like it had a will of its own. Catherine whispered, "Mary Agnes," but no answer came. Mary Agnes simply turned, moved her bed, and lay down, fully clothed, eyes wide open, locked on the ceiling. That eerie stillness never left her. She didn't blink, didn't breathe deeply, didn't flinch. She just stared, and whatever was behind those eyes stared back, and she stayed that way until the morning bell rang, unmoving, unblinking, unchanged, but no longer the same. Mary Agnes blinked slowly, as if still caught in a dream, but it wasn't sleep. It was something else, something that wrapped around her mind like a fog that wouldn't lift. The other novices began to stir for morning prayer. Their routine kicked in like clockwork. But Mary Agnes just sat there, eyes darting across the dormitory like she was seeing it for the very first time. Catherine leaned in. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "Do you remember last night?" Mary Agnes turned to her, confused, then feared. Real fear flickered across her face. I just slept," she stammered. "Why are you asking me that? What are you talking about?" She looked around the room, her breathing uneven, her voice shaky. She swore up and down that she had slept soundly, that she had no memory of being taken to the chapel, no memory of veiled sisters or glowing symbols. Nothing. But Catherine's instincts screamed otherwise. Over the next few days, she watched Mary Agnes closely, and that's when the changes began. Mary Agnes, who used to devour scripture, page after page, could now barely get through a single verse. She would stare at the words like they were crawling off the page, rearranging themselves into impossible patterns. One moment she'd be reading the Psalms, the next she'd drop the book, whispering, "It's not supposed to say that." During communal prayer, she would suddenly go still mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open as her gaze drifted toward the ceiling. Her lips would tremble. Sometimes she'd tilt her head, as if she were listening. But there was nothing, no sound, just silence. And then there was the food. Mary Agnes no longer ate. She sat with the other novices at the long wooden table, a spoon in one hand, a slice of bread untouched on her plate. She'd push the food around, pretend to chew, but she never swallowed anything. Yet she was stronger than ever. While the others grew weak from fasting and frost, Mary Agnes seemed to glow. Her skin, pale before, now shimmered faintly, catching candlelight like polished ivory. She moved with grace, faster and more agile than before. Her eyes were clearer, sharper, almost inhumanly so. 3 days after her midnight visit to the chapel, Catherine was assigned to clean it. The stone floor was freezing beneath her knees as she scrubbed, the bristles of her brush scraping across limestone worn smooth by centuries of prayer. She tried to focus, but her heart pounded louder than her footsteps. She reached the back wall, near the shadows cast by the high altar, a jagged stone slab still slick with cold moisture. And then she saw it. Words, carved into floor, not etched with time or age, but freshly and with terrifying precision, barely visible unless you were right there, scrubbing the floor, hands to the stone. Catherine's eyes locked on the message. They are not what they seem. The old ways never died here. Trust no one, especially those who return changed. Find the hidden room behind the altar. The truth is written in the stones. Save yourself while you still can. Signed, Ameo. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Mary Agnes O'Brien. She knew the handwriting. She had seen it 100 times before, on shared prayer notes, in the margins of study books. There was no mistake, and this message wasn't old. It had been carved recently, deliberately placed in a spot only someone cleaning the chapel floor would ever find. But the message wasn't just a warning. It was a riddle, a final act of defiance or a cry for help. What always? What hidden room? And how could Mary Agnes write such a desperate plea, only forget she had ever done it? Catherine stood up slowly, brush still in hand, the carved message staring up at her like an open wound in the stone. The chapel suddenly felt colder, the air heavier, the silence deeper. She wasn't just cleaning sacred ground anymore. She was standing in the middle of a secret, and now that secret had seen her too. Catherine Murphy's view of St. Margaret's was beginning to collapse. What once seemed like a strict, austere convent now looked more like something ancient and dangerous, wearing the skin of religion. She stopped assuming anything was what it appeared to be. Every hallway, every shadow, every silence. She studied them all. Her survival now depended on noticing what others missed. And what she discovered over the next few weeks painted a picture far more sinister than she could have imagined. The winter deepened. Snow piled against the walls like a siege, trapping them in place. But it wasn't just the weather holding them there. It was ritual. That's when Catherine realized there was a pattern. Every few nights, like clockwork, the dormitory doors would creak open at exactly midnight. Always midnight. Never earlier, never later. And always it was Mother Agatha. She'd glide in, silent as a shadow, flanked by the two veiled sisters who never showed their faces, not even during daylight. Catherine had watched them closely. She never once saw them eat, speak, or even blink. They'd whisper a name, one name, always in the same chilling tone. So quiet it was almost nothing, yet echoed to the stone like a bell. And the chosen novice? She would rise, without resistance, without question, as if hypnotized, and she would leave, disappear into the candlelit hallway. Catherine began to track everything, to scratches beneath her bed, one mark for every girl who vanished into the night. By the end of January, she had scratched 8 marks, 8 girls taken at midnight, and 3 of them never came back. No explanation, no mention of them from the other sisters. Their belongings vanished the next day, folded, cleaned, and removed like they never existed. But the ones who did return came back changed. Take Sister Elizabeth Hartwell, one of the first to be taken. When she came back, her skin was pale like porcelain, almost glowing under candlelight. But it was her eyes. Her eyes were bottomless. Looking into them was like staring down a deep, black well. You could feel your thoughts slipping if you stared too long. She stopped talking. No jokes, no conversation, just simple nods and during communal prayer, she began muttering in a language none of the others had ever heard. Not Latin, not French. It was older, rougher, guttural. It made Catherine's stomach twist just to hear it. Then there was Sister Sarah Morton, called a week later. Sarah had once been the most pious of the novices. She spent extra hours praying at the chapel, her fingers constantly wrapped around her rosary beads. But when she returned, something had shifted violently. She couldn't even look at a crucifix. When passing a large cross in the corridor, she would flinch, eyes shut tight, hand over her chest like she'd been burned. During chapel, she stayed as far from the altar as possible. And when someone finally asked her why, her answer chilled the room. "They burn," she whispered. "I feel them inside my skin, like fire crawling under my bones." And then came Rebecca Stone, the youngest novice in the entire convent. She was barely 18, innocent, gentle, struggling with her prayers just like Catherine. But after her midnight disappearance, she returned different, stronger, smarter, and somehow far too wise. She began reciting full passages in Latin, perfectly fluent, fluid, and full of meaning. But the most terrifying part? Just days before, she couldn't even pronounce basic prayers. And then she started saying things that made no sense, like, "The doors beneath are opening," or "The old hunger is stirring again." No one knew what it meant. But Catherine was sure one thing. These weren't just midnight examinations. They were something else entirely, a transformation, a ritual, and whatever was happening to her sisters was coming for her next. Something was wrong with Rebecca, unnervingly wrong. She spoke like a scholar now, casually dropping references to obscure saints, forgotten councils, and theological debates, so niche they were taught only in the highest levels of the Vatican's archives. And yet she delivered them like bedtime stories. No hesitation, no studying, just flawless knowledge, out of nowhere. When the other novices asked her where she'd learned it all, she'd just smile. But not the smile of a teenager. It was ancient, a knowing, eerie grin that didn't belong on an 18-year-old face, and she'd always give the same cryptic answer: "I've had excellent teachers." That's when the whispers started. The novices, the few who hadn't yet been taken at midnight, huddled together during their brief windows of conversation, their voices barely above a breath. Some tried to rationalize it. Maybe the missing sisters were just transferred, one whispered, or maybe they chose lives of solitude, hermits in the basement. But Catherine didn't believe that anymore. What she had seen, what she had heard, painted a much darker truth. She started watching the senior sisters more closely. They were supposed to be just as starved, just as sleep-deprived, just as cold. But somehow they weren't. They walked the halls with perfect posture, faces smooth and serene, eyes bright like candles burning from the inside. Their skin shimmered faintly, like oil in the light. They never coughed, never limped, never tired. They were thriving in a place designed to break you, and that's when the nights got even worse. Because something was happening down in the basement chapel. At first, it was just faint sounds. Nothing you could really hold on to, just a low groan of wind or the creak of ancient wood. But then it became something else. Rhythmic chanting. Not Latin, not French. Something older. The language twisted, half whispers, half melodies, not quite male, not quite female. The tones bent unnaturally, echoing to the walls and straight into Catherine's chest. It didn't sound like it was meant to be heard by human ears. Then came the crying, or was it singing? The sound shifted so strangely through the stone that she couldn't tell if it was sorrow or praise. And once she heard laughter, but not laughter like a joke, not human laughter. It was cold, cruel, intelligent, the kind of sound that knows exactly where you're hiding, and that it's only a matter of time. And with the laughter came other sounds, scraping, stone against stone, like something being dragged across the floor. Then came the tapping, slow, deliberate, patterned, and finally, dripping, soft, repetitive, liquid hitting stone in a way that made her stomach churn. That's when Catherine made her decision. She had to know the truth, even if it destroyed her. She began breaking the rules, slipping into forbidden hallways during her cleaning duties. Corridors marked off-limits. Rooms that hadn't been opened in decades. She learned the timing of the senior sisters, knew which corridors went unused. And every moment she could steal, she spent mapping, exploring, documenting. Because whatever was happening in the depths of St. Margaret's was unholy. It was ancient, hidden, feeding on them all, and she was going to find it. Catherine started building a map in her head, one corridor at a time, because something wasn't adding up. The outside of the convent, modest, compact, just a 3-story stone structure tucked into the snowy hillside. But inside, it went on forever. Hallways stretched deeper than they should. Corridors bent in impossible ways. And when she compared the building's layout to the hand-drawn architectural sketches she'd seen in the archives, the math didn't work. The convent was bigger on the inside, and it got worse in the basement. That's where the chapel was. That's where the sounds came from. And that's where she found the tunnels. Tunnels chambers. Rooms carved directly from bedrock. Ancient stone hollowed by hands long forgotten. Some rooms made sense. Wine cellars, food storage, places to preserve herbs and medicine. But others? Empty, cold, covered in symbols. The same twisted spirals, eyes, and geometric designs in the chapel, etched deep into the stone walls like ancient graffiti, humming with meaning she couldn't decipher. These rooms had no windows, no furniture, no function. They weren't for living. They were for something else. And then she found it. The thing Mary Agnes had warned her about. The hidden room behind the altar. It happened during one of her cleaning sessions. She had finished scrubbing the base of the altar when she noticed something off. The stones on the rear wall weren't aligned like the others. One was just slightly crooked. She leaned in, touched the symbols. They were smooth, warmer than the rest of the wall. And when she pressed 3 specific carvings in sequence, a spiral, an eye, then a triangle, click, the wall shuddered. A soft rush of air escaped from the cracks, and then the stone slid open. Behind it was a hidden chamber, untouched, unlit, and completely silent. And what Catherine saw inside, it shattered everything. This wasn't a prayer room. This wasn't storage. This was a library of secrets. Hundreds of books and scrolls, stacked in crude wooden shelves, laid across stone tables, bound in leather and skin. But these weren't religious texts. They weren't Bibles. They weren't even in Latin. Some were written in languages she couldn't identify. Twisted symbols, vertical scripts, looping glyphs that seemed to shift when you stared too long. Others were fresher, written in ink so black it gleamed. Their pages were filled with illustrations, diagrams, and formulas, showing rituals that had nothing to do with Christianity. One book showed a human body surrounded by rings of fire. Another depicted a figure levitating over a stone altar, its face twisted in ecstasy or agony. Another showed a woman's eyes glowing, with tiny creatures spilling from her mouth into a bowl. But the most disturbing one, a manuscript written in French. Catherine could read parts of it. It was titled, La Transformation Divine, the Divine Transformation. As she flipped through its brittle pages, a horrifying picture emerged. This was no ordinary theology. It was a step-by-step guide, a ritual manual, describing how to elevate the human form to something higher, something beyond pain, beyond mortality, beyond humanity. The process? Brutal, precise, unholy. It required fasting, isolation, midnight rites, consumption of sacred fluids, and submission to the ancient essence beneath. It spoke of piercing the veil of flesh and inviting the divine parasite to root within. And then, in bold red ink, as if added later, a single phrase repeated throughout the margins. They must be willing, they must be willing, they must be willing. Catherine felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. This wasn't purification. This wasn't faith. It was possession, disguised as transcendence. And the Sisters of Divine Mercy weren't saints. They were something else entirely. Catherine turned the page, and the room seemed to stop breathing. She had read ancient prayers, ritual instructions, chants that made her teeth itch. But this was different. This was a manual, a guide, a set of cold, clinical instructions for breaking a human soul. The methods were spelled out in terrifying precision, step by step. It started with isolation, cutting the subject off from all comfort, all familiarity. Then came sensory deprivation, the removal of light, warmth, sound. Nothing to ground you, nothing to hold on to. Then came the substance, a liquid described in reverent tones, thick, dark, sacred, consecrated through ancient rites, passed from hand to hand for generations of initiates. It wasn't a symbol, it wasn't metaphor. It was real, and it was being fed to the girls. The manuscript described what followed: loss of memory, erosion of personality, the gradual hollowing of the self, until the subject no longer resisted, no longer questioned, until they became a vessel, a shell. The text claimed it brought collective wisdom, shared awareness. But to Catherine, it sounded more like possession. And then she found a ledger. She didn't need to read the handwriting to know whose it was. The letters were perfect, deliberate, elegant, Mother Agatha's hand. And inside, every single girl who had ever passed through St. Margaret's in the last 15 years, not just the current novices, dozens more, names she had never heard spoken aloud. Each page was chilling. A profile of each girl, her background, her family, her temperament, written like a report card or a lab experiment. There were progress updates, integrated, unfit for conversion, alternative arrangements made. And worst of all, some entries ended with just one word: consumed. No explanation, just a date, a name, and silence. Catherine's heart stopped when she reached the most recent pages. These weren't history. These were current. Her group, the girls she prayed beside, ate with, bled with, and then her own name. There was Catherine Murphy. She read it, and her hands trembled. Highly intelligent, strong-willed, demonstrates troubling independence of thought. Potential for integration unclear. May require special handling if resistance develops. Monitor closely for signs of awareness. She couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. She wasn't a student. She wasn't a disciple. She was prey. And worse, they were watching her. Already, the burden of that knowledge crushed her. St. Margaret's wasn't a sanctuary. It was a factory, a trap, a carefully engineered system to lure, break, and rebuild young women into something else entirely. And now she had proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. If she spoke, she'd be punished, labeled a heretic, sent for midnight correction. She needed allies. That's when Margaret O'Brien entered the picture. Smart, watchful, daughter of a Boston physician, and already suspicious. During a brief break while peeling root vegetables in the freezing kitchen, Catherine leaned over and whispered just one word: basement. That night, after lights out, Margaret slipped from her bed. Barefoot, silent, she met Catherine in the storage room, a frigid corner filled with barrels and sacks, perfect for secrets. Catherine showed her everything: the symbols, the manuscripts, the ledger. Margaret's face drained of color. "I knew it," she whispered. "I've been tracking changes biologically, behaviorally. My roommate, Elizabeth, she came back different. She doesn't eat anymore. She chews, but I've never seen her swallow." She paused, her voice trembling. "And I've seen what she drinks instead. Thick, dark red. Mother Agatha brings it in a silver cup. The same substance from the manuscript. Margaret's medical background made her the perfect witness. She had been documenting things others missed. Changes in skin tone, eye dilation, pulse behavior, temperature resistance. These weren't girls anymore. They were transforming. And not all of them were surviving. "Their body temperature has changed," Margaret whispered, crouched in the cramped, pitch-dark storage room. "I tested it. When we're in the kitchen, right next to fire, their skin stays cold. Ice cold, even while the rest of us are sweating." She leaned in closer, voice shaking. "And they're breathing. Catherine, sometimes it just stopped for minutes. No inhale, no exhale. Nothing. Like they've forgotten what it means to be alive." Catherine didn't want to believe it, but she had seen it too. There was something inside those girls now, something that didn't need warmth, something that didn't need air. And they weren't the only ones noticing. Over the next few days, Catherine and Margaret began working quietly, strategically, scanning every glance, every whispered prayer, every flinch at the chapel shadows. And piece by piece, they found others. Sister Anne Fitzgerald was the first, just 18, quiet, barely holding herself together. She carved prayers into her cell wall, scratched them with a nail until her fingers bled. Words like "Deliver me, O Lord," and "Hide me from the eyes of the watchers." When Catherine found her one morning, she was sitting by the wall, her fingers raw, her eyes red, her lips still moving in silent, frantic prayer. Then came Sister Rose McKenna. She hadn't spoken in days. Her roommate had vanished a week before, taken during the midnight rounds, and never returned. Since then, Rose slept clutching a makeshift cross carved from broken chair legs. She wouldn't let it go. She whispered to it in Gaelic, calling it her last offense, saying it was the only thing that kept them out of her dreams. Finally, there was Sister Carrara Walsh. Smart, sharp-eyed, always watching, always writing. Carrara had managed to get access to the convent's historical records. She worked as Mother Agatha's personal secretary, a position that gave her access to correspondence, archives, and internal ledgers. And what she found shattered everything. According to the church reports, St. Margaret's had a shining history. Dozens of young women trained, ordained, and sent to serve in parishes across America. But Carrara dug deeper. She combed through public records, baptismal logs, parish registries. And those ordained sisters from St. Margaret's didn't exist. Not one. They had simply vanished. No assignments, no names, no footprints. And it got darker. Carrara uncovered letters from families, desperate parents, writing to the convent, asking about daughters who had joined St. Margaret's but never wrote home again. No visits, no letters, not even rumors. And replies? Canned, chillingly consistent. Your daughter has chosen a life of contemplative silence. She has been called to serve in a remote mission where communication is not possible. Her heart is full of joy. Her spirit is content. But no proof was ever given. No photographs. No parish listings. Nothing but words. It was a wall of silence, built brick by brick to block out the truth. And now, Catherine, Margaret, and Rose and Clara, the last 5 unaltered novices, were beginning to piece together the full nightmare. This wasn't a failing convent. This wasn't some misguided spiritual experiment. It was a machine that, a well-oiled operation, long-running, carefully protected, and hiding something ancient beneath its foundation. They weren't just watching rituals. They were watching a transformation. And now they had a terrifying realization. They were next. It finally clicked. This wasn't just a rogue religious order gone wrong. The Sisters of Divine Mercy were something else entirely. Something that had infiltrated the church. Not to worship, not to serve, but to feed, to convert, to multiply. And they had chosen their battlefield with chilling precision. St. Margaret's wasn't randomly placed. It was designed, built deep in the Pennsylvania wilderness, just remote enough to avoid surprise inspections, but close enough to draw girls desperate for a new life, a purpose, a way to serve God. Girls like Catherine. Girls like girls like you. And the recruitment strategy? Brilliantly dark. They targeted 2 types of girls. 1, the forgotten, from poor families who wouldn't come looking. 2, 3, the unreachable, from distant cities where a missing letter could be blamed on weather or bad roads. 4, no one to notice, no one to ask questions. But now, 5 had survived. Catherine, Margaret, Clara, Rose, and they met in secret. Cold stone corners lit by candlelight, whispering truths that had been buried for decades. Each girl brought a piece of the puzzle. Catherine revealed what she had found in the hidden chamber. The rituals, the symbols, the ledger of the lost. Margaret laid out her chilling medical notes, how the transformed girls no longer needed food, warmth, or even breath. Clara exposed the paper trail, the false letters, the vanishing nuns, the silence from church authorities. And Anne and Rose, they tracked the behaviors, the timing, the precise, mechanical rhythms of the midnight sessions. And what they discovered chilled them all. The transformation wasn't instant. It wasn't one ceremony, one mistake, one night. It was a process, a slow, deliberate reprogramming. Physical, emotional, spiritual. The midnight rituals were just a beginning, an initiation. After that came the fasting, the chanting, the dreams, the injections, the whispered prayers and languages no one recognized. They watched as girls faded, not all at once, but bit by bit. First, the laughter disappeared, then the personality, then the memories, until the girl was gone, and something else stared back from behind her eyes. And the most terrifying part? The senior sisters, the ones running everything, they had once been just like them. Clara had traced it. Mother Agatha, Sister Bernadette, Sister Eloise. They weren't founders. They were survivors from previous waves. Girls who came to America in the 1830s and 1840s. Young, hopeful, pure, only to be consumed and rebuilt by whatever force operated beneath St. Margaret's stone floors. They didn't escape. They adapted. They became agents of the thing they couldn't defeat. And now, Catherine and her friends were next. So they did the only thing they could. They began planning an escape. But the moment they started, they realized they were trapped on every side. The convent was surrounded by miles of wilderness. No roads, no tracks, no telegraph lines, just snow, cold, ice, wolves, and watchers. Even if they made it out, who would believe them? There were 5 girls, barely of age, claiming ancient possession rituals and underground transformation cults. No photos, no artifacts, only their word, and a world that already treated them like fragile minds and hysterical hearts. But the worst part? They were already being watched. The senior sisters began turning up, silently, unexpectedly, standing in doorways, lingering at prayer, staring too long at Catherine's hands. They smiled too much. They listened too carefully, and their eyes weren't blinking anymore. They weren't hiding anymore. Mother Agatha's behavior had shifted, subtly at first, but now unmistakable. Her eyes lingered too long. Her words felt rehearsed. And the senior sisters? They hovered like vultures over every move the 5 girls made. The resistance had been discovered. The walls were closing in, and the clock was ticking. They all knew what came next. The midnight call. Once summoned, it was over. You returned different or didn't return at all. So they planned one final strategy meeting. One last shot at escape. March 10th, 1847. They crept into the storage room, hearts pounding, breath fogging in the freezing air. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. But the second they stepped inside, they froze. She was already there, Mother Agatha, seated calmly on a grain barrel, hands folded, eyes gleaming like cut glass in the candlelight. A slow smile spread across her face, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't maternal. It was predatory. "My dear children," she purred. That same silken voice, sweet and honey poured over iron nails. But this time there was something else in it. Laughter, mockery, victory. "Did you really believe," she said, "that your little gatherings had gone unnoticed? This building has been ours for 15 years. We know every stone, every echo, every fear that hides behind your eyes." She stood as more figures emerged from the shadows, silent, swift, surgical. The senior sisters. They formed a perfect circle around the girls, like wolves closing in. No veils this time. No more hiding. And when Catherine looked at them, really looked, her stomach dropped into ice. These weren't nuns. These weren't even human anymore. Their skin was waxy, pulled tight like parchment over bones that weren't shaped right. Cheekbones jagged like broken porcelain. Jaws too long. Necks too slender. Fingers bending in subtle, unnatural angles. And their eyes, reflective, like mirrors in the dark, glowing faintly with the flicker of the candles, like the gaze of some nocturnal predator. And when they smiled, teeth, too many, too long, too sharp. It was like staring into the face of a mask that only pretended to be human. And now the mask had slipped. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Every escape plan, every theory, every bit of hope they had clung to, gone. They weren't just dealing with corrupted women of faith. They were facing creatures, designed, disguised, and perfected over decades. And tonight, they weren't here to warn. They were here to harvest. Catherine could barely process what she was seeing. The senior sisters weren't just stepping forward. They were closing in, their movements too fluid, too perfect, their bodies bending in ways that no human frame should allow. Joints that didn't move like joints. Limbs that whispered of something ancient. Something built differently. Mother Agatha stood effortlessly, her long figure rising like smoke, like silk floating up without wind. "We want you to understand," she said, voice velvet wrapped around blades. "This is not punishment. This is elevation." She began circling them like a conductor before the final note. "You have been chosen, not for death but for ascension. The fear you feel." She paused, eyes locking with Catherine's. "It is the fear of the caterpillar, just before it becomes a butterfly." Catherine's voice finally broke free, brittle and shaking. "What are you? What have you done to the others?" Mother Agatha's smile widened, and this time those sharpened teeth gleamed in the dim light. "We are what you could be," she whispered. "What humanity becomes once it stops clinging to the myths of weakness." She gestured behind her. "Your friends, your sisters, your roommates. They've been given a choice. Some welcomed it. Others needed convincing. But all of them contributed to something far greater than themselves." Margaret, the scientist, the rational one, stepped forward, her voice steady but low. And the ones who couldn't be changed? What happened to them? Mother Agatha turned to her calmly, as if answering a question at afternoon tea. Nothing is ever wasted. Her tone was almost cheerful. Their essence, their life force, every drop, went on to sustain those of us who succeeded. The weak feed the strong. The temporary fuels the eternal. She raised a hand, and the other sisters tightened the circle. Catherine could smell it now. Not incense, not holy oil, but metal and rot. That same sickly sweet smell that had clung to the returned novices. The scent she thought was herbs or medicine. But now it was death, disguised, repurposed, bottled. Mother Agatha's pale gaze swept across them all. You have two choices, she said. You may join us willingly, retain fragments of your identity, and walk into eternity with dignity. Her voice dipped lower. Or resist, and let us take you the hard way. You will erase, your name forgotten, your mind dissolved. And broke down sobbing, her small body shaking in the corner. We just wanted to serve God, she whispered. That's all we ever wanted. To help people. To be good. Mother Agatha knelt beside her, stroking her hair with fingers far too long, too white, too cold. And so you shall, she cooed, but you will serve something older, something far more magnificent than the pale god of your peasants and priests. You will be part of a force that predates your Christ, your prophets, your churches. Her voice deepened, darkened. We have lived inside religion for over 1,000 years, hidden, watching, feeding on the faith of innocence. She stood. And now you're ready to join us. If you're still watching this and your skin's not crawling, we don't know what to tell you, If this story has your heart pounding, share it with someone who needs to see the truth, and smash that like button so we can keep bringing you more dark tales like this. But we're not done, not even close, because what happened next will shake you. Rose, silent till now, suddenly straightened her spine and stepped forward. Her voice rang out with iron beneath the fear. You're talking about demons, about selling our souls. Mother Agatha's laugh cracked through the room like shattered glass. Demons, souls, such primitive words, she hissed. We are not evil. We are evolution. She moved her hand with a snap, and the senior sisters revealed their hands. Each held a cup, tarnished silver, oozing, alive. The liquid inside writhed like it had a mind of its own. Its surface shimmered and pulsed like coagulated blood crossed with motor oil. The smell hit them instantly. Copper, rot, flowers left in the grave too long. Catherine gagged. Margaret turned pale. Clara stepped back. Even Rose flinched. Mother Agatha spoke again, now like a teacher, explaining a routine. This sacred substance, she said, was consecrated long before the written word, long before your civilizations. Once consumed, it begins a cleansing. It dissolves your lesser self, so your true form can emerge. And then she smiled. The transformation takes several days. The transformation takes several days, Mother Agatha whispered, during which you will experience visions and sensations your current minds can't begin to imagine. Catherine could feel the panic rise in her chest. Margaret took a step back, her doctor's instinct kicking in. That's poison, she snapped. You're talking about poisoning us. Mother Agatha tilted her head, unfazed, smiling like a serpent in prayer. Poison is such an ugly word, she said smoothly. Medicine can be poison. Poison can be medicine. It all depends on the dose and the intended outcome. She stepped forward, and the sisters followed, silent, smiling, ready. What we offer, she continued, doesn't destroy, it elevates. It doesn't kill, it awakens. Your friend Mary Agnes? She resisted at first, too. She paused. But now, her voice dropped to a whisper, she serves joyfully. Catherine's mind fractured under the weight of it all. Mary Agnes, her roommate, the one who had disappeared without a trace, the one they were told had been transferred to a mission in Canada. She hadn't left. She had been taken, transformed, swallowed by this thing pretending to be a church. And now, it was happening again. But worse still, this wasn't isolated. St. Margaret's wasn't some freak occurrence. It was a node, a hub, a feeding ground. Catherine's brain exploded with questions she didn't want answered. How many other convents? How many monasteries? How many churches around the world were just like this? Feeding, harvesting, transforming in secret. How many innocent souls, searching for purpose, had walked into a sanctuary and found only obliteration. But now wasn't the time for horror. Now was the time for action. They were trapped in a room the size of a pantry. One door, no windows. Surrounded by creatures stronger, faster, and smarter than them. Outside, a brutal winter storm. Sub-zero temperatures. Wolves. Death. Stay and be transformed. Run and freeze. They were stuck in a horror movie with no good endings. And then, for the first time, Clara spoke. She had stayed quiet all this time, but now her voice rang out, calm and sharp as a blade. "You're not offering us a choice," she said. Mother Agatha turned to her, smiling wider now, listening. "You're going to transform us no matter what," Clara continued. "The only difference is how much of us you let survive." The room went still. Even the senior sisters stopped. And then Mother Agatha nodded, like a teacher pleased with her brightest pupil. "Very good, child," she said. "You understand perfectly." She took a step forward, eyes glittering like wet stone. "Your intelligence will serve us well. Minds like yours are rare, and particularly useful in our collective consciousness." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Yes," she confirmed, "you will all be transformed. But the attitude you bring into the process, that will decide how much of you remains. Willing hearts retain more. Resistant minds get smoothed out." Around her, the senior sisters moved as one, like a machine, a ritual. They raised their cups in perfect synchronization, and the contents inside pulsed. The liquid wasn't liquid. It was alive, dark, thick, suspended within it. Tiny organisms, moving, swimming, shifting shape in a sea of blood-red fluid. It was like watching plankton swirl in poison wine, like seeing your reflection inside something that shouldn't exist. Catherine's stomach turned. Her knees weakened. They were holding the essence of the others. Their friends, their sisters, their memories liquefied. Mother Agatha turned to them all. "We will begin. We'll start with the most resistant," Mother Agatha announced, her gaze locking like a sniper's scope on one girl. "Catherine, Sister Catherine Murphy," she said slowly, "you've shown the greatest independence of thought, the most dangerous curiosity. You'll be the first to undergo the full transformation." The room seemed to freeze. The other girls gasped, backing into one another as the senior sister stepped forward like a hunting pack. But Catherine, she didn't flinch. In fact, something inside her snapped into place not fear, not panic, rage. Cold, calculating rage. These monsters had twisted faith into a feeding frenzy, had transformed sacred vows into tools of conquest. They had taken dozens of girls and masked it all with incense, scripture, and hollow prayers. If Catherine was going down, she'd make sure they remembered her. "You made one mistake," she said, her voice sharp, rising. "You thought we came here without a plan." For the first time, Mother Agatha blinked. "What do you mean?" Catherine smiled. "It wasn't bravado, it was war paint. We've been preparing for weeks," she said. "We know about the hidden chamber, the ledgers, and most importantly, the letters." The senior sisters froze. Something flickered in their eyes. Confusion? Worry? Clara jumped in, catching the cue. "The letters we've been writing to Bishop Ollie in Pittsburgh," she said. "Detailed reports of everything happening here. And if we disappear, those letters will be delivered." This wasn't entirely true. The letters were real, yes, but they were nothing more than rough drafts hidden in Clara's prayer book. No one had read them. No one had sent them. But the bluff hit like lightning. Mother Agatha's face twisted. Her carefully maintained calm snapped like a porcelain mask, revealing something that should never have been seen. "What letters?" she roared, her voice glitching, layering with something not of this world. "Father Metz." Margaret shouted suddenly. The old priest. He's been taking them during his weekly visits. By now, investigators are probably already on their way. Total bluff. Father Metz hadn't visited in months because of the snow. But the lie exploded like a grenade in the enemy camp. Mother Agatha let out a shriek. No longer human. No longer a nun. A sound like tearing metal and bone. The senior sisters began to twitch violently, jerking, as if their disguises couldn't hold under the pressure. You meddling children. Agatha howled, her voice now sounding like 10 voices speaking at once. You have no idea what you've done. Her face began to dissolve, not melt, not bleed, but peel away like mist blown from glass. And what lay beneath? Monstrous. These weren't women. Not anymore. Not for a long, long time. Their limbs elongated unnaturally, twisting with joints that bent in reverse. Their skin shimmered like wax paper stretched over dark fluid. Their faces morphed, flickering between the human nuns they had once been and something far more ancient, far more predatory. Claws extended, mouths split, bones cracked. It was transformation in real time. And Catherine? She was about to be next. Mother Agatha raised her silver cup, stepping toward her, preparing to force it down her throat. You had your chance, she hissed. But then, just as the cup touched Catherine's lips, it happened. Bong. The room trembled. A bell rang across the icy landscape. Not the old bell of St. Margaret's. Not the rusted, frozen tower. The sound was pure, silver, violent. It shattered the silence like a sword slicing through smoke. Bong. The walls vibrated. The cups dropped. The senior sister screamed, all at once. And the scream? It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was like the soul of the building itself was being torn apart. They clutched their heads, convulsing, hissing, howling. Their transformation collapsed under the sound, like shadows fleeing the sun. Catherine dropped to her knees, dizzy, watching the monsters recoil like they'd been hit by lightning. Is this divine intervention? She wondered for a second. But no, the truth was more terrifying. The bells weren't holy. They weren't even part of St. Margaret's. They belonged to a rescue party, and they had just arrived. The bells hadn't come by accident. They hadn't been some lucky miracle. They had been brought by Bishop Patrick O'Malley himself, and behind him, a rescue team unlike anything the church had ever deployed in public. And the craziest part? They hadn't come because of Catherine's plan, not because of letters, not because of whispers. They came because of one man, Father Heinrich Metz. The old German priest, quiet, observant, devout, had long been uneasy about the silence from St. Margaret's. No letters, no messages, no updates from Mother Agatha, not even Christmas greetings. When the winter snows began to melt in early March, Father Metz didn't wait for permission. He saddled his horse, braved the freezing hills, and rode straight into the heart of darkness. What he found? Hell, he arrived unannounced in the dead of night, but instead of sleep and prayer, he found the basement chapel glowing with candlelight, filled with chanting. And on the stone floor, a body, a novice who had been officially transferred weeks earlier. Except she wasn't transferred. She was dead, or worse, in the middle of something not human. The sisters? Unrecognizable. Their faces flickering in and out of human form like broken projections. Their limbs too long, their eyes glowing, their movements inhumanly synchronized. Father Metz didn't hesitate. He turned his horse around, rode through the night, and made it to Pittsburgh by dawn. And what he told Bishop O'Malley, it changed everything. Because Father Metz wasn't just a small-town priest. He was part of a clandestine order within the church, a secret armory of faith forged centuries ago for this exact situation. They were trained to spot corruption that wore the mask of holiness, to hunt what hides inside sacred walls. And what they brought to St. Margaret's was not forgiveness. It was war. The bells weren't ordinary. They had been blessed in Rome, carved with Latin inscriptions so old, some weren't even in modern canon. They weren't just symbols, they were weapons. Their sound, engineered to disrupt the unnatural frequencies that sustained these creatures. Every chime was a strike, every note a blade of light. As they rang, the sisters began to fall apart, not like humans, not like martyrs, but like illusions torn by truth. Their skin shivered, their eyes turned to ink, their forms collapsed inward, as if the music was unraveling the very spell that bound them to the physical world. The senior sisters, once graceful and composed, began to writhe, twisting into things made of shadow and smoke. No bones, no muscle, just hunger and shape. The illusion shattered, and what stood in their place? Monsters, unanchored, shifting, eyes where mouths should be, faces melting into black static, bodies made of malice and memory, clawing to hold their shape. But one didn't fall. Mother Agatha. She didn't scream. She didn't tremble. She stood, even as her human face peeled away like paper in fire, even as her fingers stretched into talons and her eyes turned crimson gold. She held her ground, because she wasn't just a servant of this thing. She was a thing, something far older than the church, older than the hills, older than words. And as her form expanded, filling the room with tendrils of darkness and heat, she smiled again, not the smile of a nun, but of a god in the skin of a woman. And she spoke. You think bells and prayers can end me? She had lived too long, longer than any creature should, longer than any human could. And now, in front of everyone, her true form was peeling into reality. She was tall, twisted, hollow, a grotesque sculpture of a woman once beautiful, now rotted from centuries of feeding on stolen devotion. Her skin shimmered like oil-slick parchment. Her eyes glowed like molten gold. And where her shadow fell, the light died. You think you've won, she hissed, her voice cracking like glass under pressure. Bishop O'Malley stood firm. Behind him, priests held silver crosses like weapons, not symbols of peace, but sword of faith. Mother Agatha didn't flinch. You fools, she snarled. You understand nothing about what we truly are. You think this nest is the end. She raised both arms, and the walls seemed to tremble. We've existed in your churches for over 1,000 years. For every one of us you burn, 10 more are ordained. For every miracle, for every baptism, for every Eucharist, we are there, feeding, watching, waiting. She leaned forward, teeth like splinters, smile like a wound. Your faith is the perfect disguise, and your faithful, the perfect prey. The room chilled. Catherine felt her knees buckle. The horror wasn't just in the convent. It was in the system. It was everywhere. But then the bishop stepped forward, and he spoke, not with fear, not with panic, with fire. You are neither eternal, he said, nor unique. His voice boomed, not from volume, but from truth. You are parasites. You feed on faith because you have none of your own. You wear the robes of sacred, but your souls are dust. The church has faced your kind before. It will face you again. But tonight, he lifted his cross. Your feeding ends. The silver cross flared, not from flame, but from something older than light. It glowed with heaven's fury. Then the bishop began to chant. Latin, but not the kind from Mass, older, deeper. It was Latin interwoven with pre-Christian prayers, ancient syllables that pulsed like heartbeats. The priest joined in. The air thickened. The floor shook. The bells rang again, not by hand, but by force, as if the prayers themselves were shaking the metal. Mother Agatha shrieked. She stumbled, and then she began to age, right in front of them. Her stolen time, her fake immortality. It was all unraveling. The smooth skin cracked. The shimmering eyes dimmed up. The twisted bones buckled. She reached out, desperate, frantic. The sacred substance, she gasped. Without it, we can't hold form. Please, you must understand, we only took what was given freely. Her voice fractured. Her face collapsed. These girls came to us. They were seeking purpose, devotion. We simply redirected it to something more deserving. Bishop O'Malley's gaze burned with holy resolve. You took their lives, he said. You twisted their trust. You devoured their souls. There is nothing sacred about what you've done, and there will be no mercy for what you have become. Then, the final prayer. And what followed? Silence. A moment so heavy, it felt like the earth had stopped turning. Mother Agatha collapsed inward, like a dying star, her body folded on itself, aging thousands of years in seconds. Her voice faded to a whispered, a hiss. A sob. Then nothing. Gone. As if she'd never been. Just a pile of ashes and a faint shimmer in the air. Catherine didn't cry. She couldn't. She watched the dust drift into the candlelight, and in that moment she understood. This wasn't just the end of a monster. It was the end of an era of silence. Mother Agatha's final words hit like a knife. We were human once. Her voice, barely a whisper now, cracked through the silence like a confession made on a deathbed. We were just like you, young, searching, faithful. Her face, now more shadow than flesh, seemed to soften. We found something older than Christianity, something that promised eternal life. She trembled, but what it gave us wasn't life. It was eternal hunger. She turned toward the girls, not as a monster, but as a warning. Don't remember us as creatures, she said. Remember us as what happens when desperation poisons devotion. And then, with a sound like wind across dry leaves, she crumbled. Her centuries of stolen time unraveled into dust, swirling into the cold, candlelit air. Around her, the other twisted sisters fell, their warped forms finally succumbing to the bishop's ancient prayers, their smoke-like bodies dissolving back into the shadows that had birthed them. Silence. For the first time in hours, there was silence. Only the distant echo of the blessed bells still rang, slow, solemn, as if tolling for the dead. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. As the rescue team swept the convent, helping the 5 survivors, Catherine, Margaret, Rose, Clara, and they uncovered something so horrific, so gut-wrenching, it would scar them for life. Not all the transformed novices were gone. Some were still alive. They were trapped in a twilight state, not human anymore, but not fully monster. Some could barely speak. Others cried, whispered, begged, and what they said, please end it. These girls remembered who they had been, but they also knew what they were becoming. They felt their bodies breaking and their minds slipping, fighting off the final transformation with every ounce of willpower. But they were starving. Without the sacred substance, their corrupted bodies began to fail. But if they took more, the change would complete. No way out. The bishop, a man of God, a man of law, faced a decision no man should ever face. Let them die slowly in agony, or give them a swift, merciful end. In the end, he chose mercy. He gave each girl her last rites, tears falling as he spoke the words. Then, one by one, he released them. It was a mass funeral without a casket, a victory soaked in tragedy. Of the 17 girls who entered Street Margaret's, only 5 walked away whole. The aftermath was biblical. The church launched a full investigation, but it was never meant to reach the public. The entire convent was destroyed, stone by stone, every inch purified with ancient rites. Every object, every relic, examined. What they found: ritual tools older than Christianity, preserved remains hidden in walls, journals and maps detailing a global network of similar orders. St. Margaret's had been just one node in a much larger machine. The church sealed the records, buried the truth, filed it away in the Vatican archives under classifications so restricted, not even cardinals could read them. Officially, the convent was closed for administrative irregularities. Unofficially, they had faced something older than evil itself. The land was left untouched. Blessed, but local whispers never stopped. Strange lights flickering at night. Echoes of chanting that rose from the ground. A feeling that the forest itself remembered. But over time, even those faded, nature reclaimed the site, and the world moved on. As for Catherine Murphy, she left religious life, but not her faith. She had seen what happened when humans corrupted holiness But she never lost belief in the divine. She married Thomas Sullivan, a young doctor from the rescue team. They had 6 children. She became a teacher, a writer, and a relentless advocate for women's rights. She never spoke of St. Margaret's again, not to her husband, not to her children, not even on her deathbed at age 93. But tucked in a sealed envelope beneath her rosary was a letter. It read, "If you ever find another place like St. Margaret's, don't call the bishop. Don't wait for Rome. Burn it to the ground before it feeds again." The horror of St. Margaret's didn't end in fire. It echoed across decades, across continents, through the lives of the women who survived. And none felt that burden more than Catherine Murphy. She never spoke publicly about what happened, never published a memoir, never wrote a single article, but she didn't forget. She couldn't. She carried that secret, the truth of what she'd witnessed behind those cursed convent walls, all the way to her grave in 1940. Her family thought she died peacefully, but in 1952, everything changed. Catherine's great-granddaughter, cleaning out an old attic, found a sealed wooden box beneath a pile of blankets. Inside, letters, dozens of them, handwritten, dated 1847, pages stained with tears, with ink that shook from trembling hands, and what they described, unthinkable, everything, the rituals, the disappearances, the hidden chapel, the sacred substance, the names, dates, descriptions of faces that changed, voices that weren't human, all corroborated, decades later, by sealed Vatican records that were never supposed to see daylight. Church historians couldn't believe it, but they couldn't deny it either. Catherine's letters were the only first-hand account of what happened during those dark winter months in the Pennsylvania hills, and to this day, they remain one of the most disturbing documents in the Church's secret archives. Margaret O'Brien, the convent's healer, never escaped the shadows of that winter, but instead of running, she fought. She became one of the first women accepted into a Pennsylvania medical school, and she dedicated her life to serving the forgotten, the poor, the sick, the outcast. But she never married, never let anyone close. "The closer you love," she once said, "the easier you are to break." She died in 1901 during a cholera outbreak in Philadelphia, still wearing the rosary she had brought from the convent, and Fitzgerald returned to Ireland, quiet and reserved. She never spoke of her time in America, not once. Her family assumed the convent hadn't suited her, but she began to fade after returning. She died young, 34, from what doctors call consumption, but her mother always whispered a different truth. "America took something from her," she said, "something we never got back." Rose McKenna settled in Boston. She became a teacher, serving the children of immigrant families with fierce compassion. But something in her was always watchful. She married late, had 2 children, and guarded them like a soldier. Her husband later confessed that Rose would wake in the night screaming, clutching the sheets and sobbing. "They wear robes, but they aren't human." She died in 1889, leaving behind one chilling instruction in her will: "My children are never to end a religious life, ever." And then there was Clara Walsh. She didn't become a mother, she became a weapon. One of the first women in Boston to work at a major newspaper, Clara made her name investigating corruption in religious and charitable institutions. She had a reputation: fearless, sharp, unstoppable. And though no one connected the dots, her investigations always circled one unspoken pattern: institutions that hid darkness behind holiness. She spent her life trying to burn out what she saw grow in that basement chapel. All 5 women never saw each other again, but they had a silent pact, an understanding carved in fear and fire. Never speak, never return, never forget. The church buried the story. The world forgot the convent. But the letters, the journals, the truth still exists, filed deep inside Vatican archives, under a name no priest dares say aloud. And if you ever stumble across a forgotten convent in the woods, One that shouldn't be there, one with no records, no living history. Don't knock, don't pray, don't enter, just run. Because what was buried was never meant to die. Clara never married. She said the horror she saw had taught her one thing: never trust anyone who claims to speak for your soul. And she meant it. She spent the rest of her life exposing corruption in the very places others were too afraid to look. Financial abuse, sexual misconduct, psychological control. No religious institution was safe from her pen. When she died in 1905, her apartment held over 400 articles, sealed interviews, and a coded ledger linking dozens of suspicious convents across the Northeast. And guess what? She wasn't working alone. The 5 survivors, Catherine, Margaret, Rose, Clara, and stayed connected for life, not through social events, but through a secret correspondence network. Their letters, written in code. Each one carried tips, warnings, and red flags about convents across America and Europe. They flagged patterns, sudden closures, missing novices, financial trails that vanished into thin air, institutions that discouraged outside contact. Through their silent alliance, they helped expose and shut down at least 6 other orders exploiting young women. Nothing they found was quite as horrifying as St. Margaret's, but the signs were there. Everywhere. Something had learned how to hide behind faith. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. After the St. Margaret's incident, church investigators uncovered a global pattern. There were reports from France, Ireland, England, Germany, even remote missions in Africa and South America. Each report described entities posing as nuns, priests, or spiritual leaders, and always in isolated areas. Always with missing novices. The woman who called herself Mother Agatha Russo, her name surfaced in 3 other countries, dating back almost 100 years before she arrived in Pennsylvania. This wasn't just one monster. It was a network, a global, parasitic force that had learned to hide inside holy places, feeding on faith. Feeding on obedience. Feeding on silence. And when Bishop Unholy realized that, he went to war. In 1975, after his private papers were declassified, researchers discovered the truth. Unholy had created a secret task force inside the church. Its goal: track, identify, and eliminate corrupted religious houses. Quietly, his notes list 12 additional convents and monasteries that were cleansed after St. Margaret's. Some had been closed for administrative reasons. Others had mysterious fires or were reclaimed by nature. There's no public record of this department, no official name, but internal memos refer to it only as the Shepherd's Sword. Its agents operated under direct authority of the bishop, and possibly the Vatican. They were priests and nuns, even lay people trained to detect spiritual corruption, hiding under religious obedience. Their protocol? Investigate, confirm, purge. But despite all that, the problem was never eradicated. Because faith, pure, selfless, beautiful faith, is a perfect disguise for darkness. And the church knew it. So what did they do? They changed rules. More oversight, more documentation, regular visits to convents, mandatory family contact for all novices. But they never told the public why. Because admitting it would destroy millions of people's trust. So they hid the truth. Again, Catherine's final letter, written just weeks before she died in 1940, included a message so powerful it reads like prophecy. The enemy of faith is not disbelief. It is false faith. Evil rarely wears horns. Sometimes it wears robes. And sometimes it calls itself holy. She warned against blind obedience, against teachers who discourage questions, against any spiritual institution that asks for isolation. And she ended with this: the wolves are not at the gate. They're inside the flock, wearing wool, quoting scripture, and feeding. This is a legacy of St. Margaret's, a story not just of horror, but of vigilance, of how good intentions can be twisted, and how the very structures built to protect can become tools of abuse. And the worst part? It's still happening. You won't see it in headlines. You won't hear about it on Sunday. But somewhere, right now, another house of faith might be hiding something, and the sheep have no idea. So what do you think? Do you believe everything was revealed about St. Margaret's? Have you ever felt uneasy about a religious leader or institution? Do you think this could happen again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Let's build a community of seekers, not blind followers. If this story shook you, share it with a friend. Hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe for more tales that institutions don't want you to hear. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones written in holy ink